The call came on a Thursday morning, 2 days before my father's 60th birthday party. My aunt's name on the screen, her message below it short and flat the way messages are when the person writing them has already moved on from the conversation. Change of plans, keeping it small this year. I hope you understand. I read it twice, standing in my kitchen in my work clothes, coffee going cold on the counter. I typed back, of course, no worries because that is what I do, what I have always done, and then I spent my lunch break ordering a custom photo book from the print shop 3 blocks from my office because I am that kind of person. The kind who responds with grace and then quietly keeps showing up anyway. My name is Claire. I was 31 that October and I had spent the better part of a decade being the responsible one, not the favorite one. Not the one my parents called first when something good happened. But the reliable one, the one with the stable job and the clean credit score, and the apartment that always had a guest room made up in case anyone needed it. I was the one who handled the paperwork, who understood the difference between a fixed rate and a variable one, who read contracts before signing them, mostly. I say mostly because there is one document I signed 6 years ago that I did not read carefully enough. I will get to that. The birthday party was at my parents' house, 40 minutes south of the city, the house I grew up in, the house that is technically, legally, partially mine. My brother Derek lives 20 minutes away from them. He has 2 kids and a loud laugh and the particular ease of someone who has never once been asked to be the adult in the room. My parents have always oriented themselves toward Derek the way plants orient toward light, not consciously, not maliciously, just structurally, as if it is simply the direction things grow. I understood this by the time I was in middle school. I stopped needing it to be different somewhere around 25, or I told myself I did. I drove down Saturday afternoon with the photo book wrapped in craft paper on the passenger seat and a bottle of my father's favorite bourbon in a bag on the floor. The GPS took me off the highway and through the old neighborhood, past the elementary school, past the diner where my father used to take me for pancakes before anyone else was awake. I was not feeling sentimental exactly. I was feeling something more like muscle memory, the particular low hum of someone returning to a place that shaped them before they had any say in the matter. The driveway had 4 cars in it when I pulled up. I did not recognize 2 of them. The lights in the living room were on, and I could see movement behind the curtains and hear, faintly, the particular frequency of a party already in progress. Music. A burst of laughter. The sound of people comfortable in a space. I sat in my car for a moment. I want to be honest about that. I sat there and I looked at the house and I registered what it meant that there were 4 cars in the driveway on the night of a party I had been told was canceled. And then I got out anyway because I had driven 40 minutes and I had a wrapped gift, and I was not yet ready to understand what I was looking at. I did not knock. The door was unlocked the way it always is at family gatherings, and I pushed it open and stepped into the hallway, and the party was very clearly happening. My father was in the living room in the blue shirt I had given him last Christmas, holding a glass of wine in mid-sentence to a man I didn't recognize. My mother was in the kitchen doorway laughing at something Derek had said. There were balloons. There was a banner. There were at least 12 people in a house where I had been told the gathering was too small for me to attend. Nobody saw me come in, or if they did, nobody reacted. I stood in the hallway for what was probably 10 seconds and felt something go very quiet inside me. Not dramatic, not a wave of grief. Just a door closing somewhere in a part of me that had been hoping, in spite of everything, that there was a reasonable explanation. Derek saw me first. His expression moved through 3 things quickly: surprise, calculation, and then a kind of careful neutrality that told me he had known. My mother turned a moment later, and her face did something complicated that I did not have the vocabulary for yet. My father looked up last and I watched him decide, in real time, how he was going to handle this. He settled on warm and slightly confused, as if my presence were a small scheduling mix-up rather than the consequence of a deliberate lie. He said my name and crossed the room and hugged me and said something about how I should have called. He would have let me know the plans had changed. I stood in the hug and looked over his shoulder at my mother, who was looking at the floor, and I understood that the plans had not changed. The plans had always been this. I had been the change. I did not make a scene. I want to be clear about that. I put the gift on the table, I said happy birthday, and I left. I got back in my car and I drove to the gas station on the corner and sat in the parking lot with the engine running. My hands were steady. I was not crying. I was doing something that felt more like sorting, moving things from one category to another inside my head. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Not my mother, not my father. My friend Simone, who had known me since college and who has a particular sensitivity for timing that I have never been able to explain. I answered and said nothing for a moment, and she said what happened and I told her. She listened without interrupting, which is one of her best qualities, and when I finished she said come over and I went. Simone is a real estate attorney. I mention this not as a setup but because it is simply true and because it became relevant in ways I could not have anticipated that night. We sat at her kitchen table with wine I didn't drink much of, and I talked for a long time, circling the thing I didn't want to land on, which was not the party. The party was a symptom. The thing underneath it was something I had been not looking at for 2 years. 6 years ago my parents asked me to co-sign a home equity line of credit on the house I grew up in. My father had a business idea, a small landscaping operation he wanted to expand, and the bank required a co-signer with a stronger credit profile. My mother explained it as a formality. She said my name would come off the paperwork once the business was established. She said this the way people say things they believe in the moment and quietly revise later. I signed. I was 25 and I trusted them and I did not read closely enough. What I signed made me a co-borrower, not a co-signer. A co-borrower, the difference matters. The landscaping business did not expand. It contracted and then it quietly stopped. My father moved on to other things. The line of credit did not close. 2 years ago I started getting quarterly summary statements forwarded to my email from a mortgage servicer, and I looked at them the way you look at things you don't fully want to understand. The balance was not going down, the balance was going up. I had asked my mother about it once, carefully, the way you ask about something when you're not sure you want the answer. She said they were managing it, that I shouldn't worry. I filed it in the same drawer in my mind where I filed a lot of things about my family, and I focused on my job and my apartment and the particular small life I had built that belonged to me. Sitting at Simone's table that night, saying it out loud in sequence for the first time, I heard how it sounded. Simone heard it too. She put her glass down and looked at me with the specific expression she uses when she is about to tell me something I need to hear in a professional capacity. She said she wanted to pull the deed and the loan documents before she said anything else. She said she had a contact at the county recorder's office and it would take her 48 hours. She said I should not call my parents before she talked to me again. I went home and I did not sleep well. 48 hours later, Simone called me from her office, not her cell, which told me before she said anything that what she had found was serious. She walked me through it with the patience she reserves for clients who are not yet ready to hear what they're hearing. The line of credit had been drawn on substantially over the past 3 years, in increments small enough not to trigger any automatic alerts, amounts that ranged from $400 to $3,000, consistent enough to form a pattern when you laid them out chronologically. The total outstanding balance was just under $60,000. As a co-borrower, I was equally liable. My credit, my name, my responsibility under the law. The draw history aligned almost precisely with a set of dates I recognized without wanting to. Derek had been laid off 18 months ago. Before that, he had gone through what my mother described as a difficult period that had required family support. I had been asked twice in that window to contribute to what my mother called a household stabilization fund, a phrase she had apparently invented, a phrase I had contributed to without fully asking what it meant. I had given what I considered to be my share. It had apparently not been the only source of funds. My parents had been using the equity line, which bore my name and my credit, to supplement what they were sending Derek. Simone gave me the full picture with the documents open between us on her conference table. She had already done the preliminary work because she is that kind of friend, the kind whose professional skill becomes an act of love in the right moment. She had cross-referenced the draw dates against the statements I had been passively receiving and against a set of transfer records that told a clear and unhappy story. I asked her what my options were. She told me slowly and precisely. I could request to be removed from the loan, which would require my parents to refinance without me, which would require them to qualify on their own income, which they likely could not do at current rates. I could allow the situation to continue and remain liable for a debt I had not incurred. Or I could take formal action to protect my credit and my financial standing, which would mean involving a lender review process and potentially forcing a resolution that my parents would not choose voluntarily. I sat with that for a long time. Simone did not rush me. I want to tell you what I felt in that conference room because I think it is important to be accurate about it. I did not feel rage. I felt something colder and more clarifying than rage. I felt the specific sensation of a story I had been telling myself for a long time coming apart at the seams, not violently, but with the quiet inevitability of something that was never going to hold. The story was that my family was imperfect but well-meaning. The story was that my parents loved me in a way that was simply harder to see than the way they loved Derek. The story was that the distance between us was a matter of personality and circumstance and not a matter of choice. The documents on the table told a different story. The documents said I had been useful for a long time in ways I had not consented to. Simone gave me 2 weeks, which was how long she said I should take before deciding anything. She said decisions made in the acute phase of something like this tend to be either too passive or too aggressive, and that I should let myself come down to a resting temperature first. I took her advice. I went to work. I ran my usual Saturday routes. I called my grandmother on Sunday the way I always do. I did not call my parents. On the 14th day, I called my mother and told her I wanted to sit down with her and my father. I told her I had some questions about the loan documents. Her voice did something careful when I said that. She said, of course, come for dinner Sunday. She would make the pasta I used to love when I was a kid, and I understood from the pasta that she was trying to set a particular scene. I told her I would rather meet somewhere neutral, and I named a coffee place near their house that I had chosen because it was public and had good lighting and no sentimental associations. They arrived together, my mother slightly ahead, my father behind her with his hands in his jacket pockets. They were both dressed well, which told me they had thought about the meeting, which told me they knew at some level what it was about. We sat at a table near the window. My mother ordered tea. My father ordered nothing. I had a folder on the table in front of me that Simone had helped me organize, the loan documents, the draw history, the co-borrower agreement, everything tabbed and in order. My mother spoke first. She said she knew this looked complicated and that she wanted me to understand the full picture before I drew any conclusions. She used the phrase full picture twice. My father said that the economy had been difficult and that the situation with Derek had required them to step up in ways they hadn't anticipated and that they had always intended to resolve the loan situation before it affected me. He said intended the way people say it when they mean intended to intend to. I opened the folder. I put the draw history on the table between us. I asked my mother to walk me through the disbursements from the past 3 years. I asked specifically about the 14 draws of amounts between $800 and $2,000 made between January of the year before last and the previous April. I asked whose expenses those had covered. My father looked at the paper for a moment. My mother looked at my father. Then she said something I had not expected. She said she thought I understood that this was a family matter, and that family handled things together, and that my name on the loan had been a gesture of trust on my part that they had honored in their own way. She said honored. I remember that word precisely. I closed the folder. I told them that I had consulted an attorney. I told them that Simone had reviewed the documents, and that I had a clear picture of my legal standing as a co-borrower. I told them that I was not there to argue and that I was not there to punish anyone. I told them that I needed to be removed from the loan within 60 days or I would be compelled to initiate a formal lender review to protect my own credit standing, and that a formal lender review would require a full accounting of how the funds had been used. My father's expression did the thing I had watched him do my whole life when a situation moved outside his control. He went from warm to pressured to something that looked like accusation. He said I was making this into something it wasn't. He said I had always been like this, had always needed everything to be formal and documented, as if a piece of paper was more important than the people sitting across from me. My mother said I was hurting them. I looked at my mother and I thought about the party. I thought about the 4 cars in the driveway and the banner and my father in the blue shirt and her face doing that complicated thing when she saw me in the hallway. And I thought about the quarterly statements I had been receiving for 2 years and the drawer in my mind where I had filed them away and all the things I had not wanted to understand. I said I was sorry they were hurting. I said I hoped we could resolve the loan situation in the next 60 days. I picked up the folder and I left. The formal process took longer than 60 days. It took 4 months from that coffee shop meeting to the point at which I was removed from the loan, a process that required my parents to refinance, and that involved a great deal of paperwork and 2 conversations between Simone and a loan officer, and 1 conversation I was not present for that. Simone summarized for me afterward in characteristically neutral terms. The financial resolution was not clean, but it was complete. My name came off the document. My credit was protected. The liability that had been sitting under my life like a slow leak was sealed. Derek called me during that period, once, then twice, then 3 times in a single week. He left voicemails that moved through the stages of something starting with explanation and arriving eventually at a version of appeal that I found harder to listen to than I expected. He said Mom and Dad were struggling. He said he hadn't asked them to do it the way they did. He said he hoped I understood that he had been in a bad place and that family was supposed to be there for each other. I listened to each message fully, which I think was the right thing to do, and I did not call back, which I also think was the right thing to do. My aunt sent me a text that said she had heard things were difficult, and she hoped I would remember that parents make mistakes and that family is forever. I responded that I appreciated her concern and left it at that. Two of my cousins went quiet on social media in a way that communicated something without saying it. I let that be what it was. The person who sat with me through the hardest part of it was Simone, but also, unexpectedly, my grandmother. She is 83 and she has seen enough of the world to have stopped being surprised by most of it, and she called me on a Sunday in November and asked me to tell her what had happened without anyone else's version of it. First, I told her. She was quiet for a long moment. And then she said something I have thought about many times since. She said that loving someone and protecting yourself from them are not mutually exclusive, and that anyone who tells you otherwise is usually asking you to choose the version that's more convenient for them. I am not someone who stops loving my parents. I want to be honest about that. The love is not the question. The love is not the thing that changed. What changed is what I am willing to do with it. There is a version of love that requires you to absorb damage quietly and call it loyalty, and I practiced that version for a long time. I do not practice it anymore. In the spring, I did something I had been thinking about for 2 years. I took the money I had been setting aside in a high-yield savings account, money I had not touched during all of it because I had wanted to keep it separate and clean, and I put a down payment on a 1-bedroom condo 12 minutes from my office. It has west-facing windows and a small balcony and a kitchen that is entirely mine and a guest room that I choose, each time, whether to offer. I signed the documents alone, with my own name, with no one else's credit or liability or expectation attached to any line. The closing took 45 minutes. I drove home and stood in the empty living room for a long time looking at the light coming through the windows. There was nothing dramatic about it. It was a Tuesday afternoon in April, and the light was ordinary and the rooms were quiet and they belonged to me. I still talk to my parents, at a distance and with clarity about what the distance is for. We had one conversation in February that was the most honest conversation I have ever had with either of them. It was not a comfortable conversation. It was not the conversation I would have chosen to have if there had been another option. But it was real in a way that the previous 31 years of careful maneuvering around the truth had not been, and I would not trade it back for the easier version. I think about the drive down to that party sometimes. The photo book on the passenger seat, the bourbon on the floor, the way the light looked in the living room windows when I pulled up, and how I sat in the car for a moment before deciding to go in anyway. I think about what it means to keep showing up for people who have quietly decided that your usefulness to them is more important than your presence with them. I did that for a long time. I am trying to understand it without being cruel about it, to myself or to them. Here is the thing I keep coming back to. The house I grew up in is a real place that shaped me. The people who raised me are real people who loved me in the ways they were capable of. Both of those things are true. And it is also true that I was 25 and I trusted a document I should have read, and that the cost of that trust accumulated quietly over 6 years while I looked away, and that looking away was its own kind of choice. Understanding that, really sitting with it, was the part that took the longest. The condo has a balcony I eat breakfast on when the weather allows. This morning the city was loud and ordinary, and the coffee was exactly the temperature I like, and I had nowhere to be for another hour. I thought about whether I wanted to write this down and share it, and I decided that I did, because there is probably someone who is in the part I was in 2 years ago, the part where the quarterly statements are going into a mental drawer and the story you're telling yourself is starting to have visible seams. If that is you, I want to say one thing that Simone said to me and that I have been living with since. She said that knowing the truth and acting on it are 2 different skills. Most of us learn the second one later than the first. I am still learning it, but I have good windows and I signed the lease alone, and that is somewhere to start. If you have ever signed something without reading it, or loved someone who used that love as a resource, I would like to know how you found your way back to yourself. That question is real, and I am genuinely asking.